Please don't tell my daughter.
5 words that would shatter a billionaire's heart and change 3 lives forever. The alarm clock screamed at 5:15 a.m., cutting through the darkness of the small apartment like a knife. Daniel Brooks rolled over and slapped the snooze button, his body protesting every movement. 3 years of single parenthood had worn him down to the bone, but giving up wasn't an option. Not when Emma was counting on him. He stumbled to the kitchen and started the coffee maker, the familiar ritual, grounding him for another day of fighting to keep their heads above water. The bills scattered across the counter seemed to multiply overnight. Electric gas rent Emma's school lunch account that was running dangerously low. Daniel did the math in his head for the 100th time this week. If he picked up extra shifts at the diner and skipped lunch for the rest of the month, they might just make it. The sound of small feet padding across the hardwood floor made him smile despite everything. Emma appeared in the doorway, her blonde hair sticking up at impossible angles, clutching the stuffed dragon she'd had since she was 3. "Good morning, sunshine," Daniel said, scooping her into a hug that smelled like strawberry shampoo and sleepy child. "Is it Wednesday?" Emma asked, her face pressed against his shoulder. "It's Wednesday, sweetheart. Dragon Day!" Emma's face lit up. In her elaborate mythology, each day of the week had its own special dragon. Wednesday's dragon breathed sunshine instead of fire, which made it the best day for adventures. "Can we have pancakes for breakfast?" she asked hopefully. Daniel's heart clenched. They had enough pancake mix for maybe 3 more mornings, and grocery shopping wasn't in the budget until Friday when his paycheck hit. "How about toast with peanut butter?" he suggested. "We can cut it into dragon shapes." Emma considered this seriously. She was 7 years old, but wise enough to understand when Daddy needed to save money, even if she didn't know exactly why. "Okay," she agreed. "But can you make the peanut butter extra thick? Dragons need lots of energy for flying." "Extra thick peanut butter coming right up." As Emma ate her dragon-shaped toast, chattering about her upcoming show-and-tell presentation about velociraptors, Daniel packed her lunch with the last of the sandwich meat and a juice box they couldn't really afford. He'd learned to stretch every dollar until it screamed to make a package of ground beef last 3 days and a bag of rice feed them for a week. After dropping Emma at school with a kiss and a promise to pick her up at 3:30 sharp, Daniel drove his battered Honda to the Copper Kettle Diner, where he'd worked as a server for 2 years. The pay was barely above minimum wage, but Betty Morrison, the owner, was kind enough to give him flexible hours around Emma's schedule. "Morning." "Danny," Betty called from behind the counter as he tied on his apron. "You're looking tired, honey." "Everything okay?" "Just the usual. Mrs. Betty. Nothing I can't handle." Betty studied him with the sharp eyes of a woman who'd raised 4 children and run a small business for 23 years. She could spot trouble from across the county. "You know, we've been talking about promoting someone to assistant manager. Comes with a raise and health insurance. You interested?" Daniel's heart leaped, but he forced himself to stay calm. Health insurance alone would save him $300 a month. "I'm very interested." "What would I need to do?" Betty was about to answer when the bell above the door chimed, and Frank Patterson shuffled in for his daily coffee and conspiracy theories about the government. "We'll talk later," Betty whispered. "But start thinking about it, okay? You're the hardest worker I've ever had, and Emma deserves a daddy who doesn't have to worry about paying for doctor visits." The morning rush kept Daniel busy enough to push away thoughts of overdue bills and empty bank accounts. He served coffee to construction workers heading to job sites, breakfast to retirees, who treated the diner like their personal social club, and lunch to office workers who tipped well and never looked him directly in the eye. At 2:45, Daniel's phone buzzed with a text message from a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Brooks, this is Jennifer Walsh, Executive Assistant to Victoria Ashford, CEO of Ashford Family Restaurant Group. Ms. Ashford would like to meet with you this afternoon at 4 p.m. regarding the Copper Kettle. Please confirm your attendance." Daniel read the message 3 times, his stomach dropping lower with each word. Ashford Family Restaurant Group was the corporation that had bought the copper kettle 6 months ago. Betty had assured everyone that nothing would change, that they were just investors, but Daniel had heard enough horror stories about corporate buyouts to be terrified. He showed the message to Betty, who paled visibly. "What do you think they want?" Daniel asked. "Nothing good," Betty said grimly. "These corporate types don't call individual employees for happy news." Daniel left work early to pick up Emma from school, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. If he lost his job at the diner, they'd be homeless within a month. There were no other positions in Riverside Falls that would give him the flexibility he needed to be there for Emma. "How was school today, sweetheart?" he asked as Emma climbed into the car. "Really good," Mrs. Patterson said. "My dinosaur presentation was the best one she'd ever seen. And Tommy Morrison shared his cookies with me at lunch because I didn't have any." Daniel's chest tightened. Emma didn't know they couldn't afford cookies for her lunch, but apparently other children had noticed. "That was nice of Tommy. He's my best friend. Well, him and Sarah Chen and maybe Jake Williams, but only on days when he doesn't pull my hair." Emma chattered happily about playground politics and upcoming school events, while Daniel drove them home trying to figure out what he was going to tell his daughter if the worst happened. At 3:45, Daniel dropped Emma off with Mrs. Patterson, their elderly neighbor, who watched her for free in exchange for Daniel shoveling her walk in winter and mowing her lawn in summer. "Where are you going, Daddy?" Emma asked, sensing his tension. "Just a work meeting, sweetheart. I'll be back in an hour. Will you bring me a surprise?" Daniel's throat tightened. Emma always asked for surprises, even though he rarely had the money for them. But she asked with such hope, such faith, that Daddy would find a way to make her day special. "We'll see," he said, kissing her forehead. "Be good for Mrs. Patterson." The Ashford Family Restaurant Group offices occupied the top 3 floors of the tallest building in downtown Cleveland, an hour's drive from Riverside Falls. Daniel had never been in a building so tall, never ridden an elevator to the 40th floor, never walked across marble floors that probably cost more than his annual salary. The reception area was all glass and chrome and intimidation. The receptionist, a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine, barely glanced at him when he gave his name. "Ms. Ashford will see you now," she said, gesturing toward a hallway lined with floor-to-ceiling windows. Victoria Ashford's office was the size of Daniel's entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city. The furniture looked like it belonged in a museum, and behind a desk that could have doubled as a small aircraft carrier sat the most intimidating woman Daniel had ever seen. Victoria Ashford was in her early 30s, with straight blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a red dress that probably cost more than Daniel made in 3 months. Her makeup was flawless, her jewelry understated but clearly expensive, and her expression was as warm as winter steel. "Mr. Brooks," she said, without looking up from the folder open on her desk. "Please sit down." Daniel perched on the edge of a leather chair that probably cost more than his car, trying not to think about how out of place he looked in his department store khakis and wrinkled shirt. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," Victoria continued, finally looking at him with pale blue eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail of his appearance. "I wanted to discuss your employment at the Copper Kettle." Daniel's mouth went dry. "Yes, ma'am. I've been reviewing the performance metrics for all our restaurant locations, and the Copper Kettle has some concerning issues. Customer satisfaction scores, employee productivity profit margins, all below our company standards." "I'm sorry to hear that," Daniel said carefully. "Everyone works really hard to provide good service. I'm sure they do." Victoria's tone suggested she found the concept of hard work quaint but irrelevant. However, hard work without results is just inefficiency. "Which brings me to why you're here." She pulled out another folder, thicker than the first, and opened it to reveal what looked like performance evaluations, and financial reports. Your section consistently receives the highest customer satisfaction ratings in the restaurant. Your average table turnover is 15% above the restaurant mean. You've never called in sick, never been late, and you've covered for other employees 17 times in the past 6 months without requesting overtime pay. Daniel wasn't sure if he was being complimented or criticized. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Victoria leaned back in her chair, studying him like a scientist examining an interesting specimen. Your performance metrics suggest that you're capable of much more than serving tables in a small-town diner, which makes me curious about something. She pulled out a single sheet of paper and slid it across the desk. Daniel's heart stopped when he saw what it was. A copy of his college transcripts. A degree in business administration from Ohio State, graduated summa cum laude. You have a business degree from a respected university. You graduated at the top of your class, and yet you're working as a server in a diner. Why, Daniel's carefully constructed composure began to crumble. He'd hoped that part of his past would stay buried, that no one would ever connect the young man with big dreams to the single father just trying to survive. Sometimes life doesn't go according to plan, he said quietly. Clearly. Victoria's tone was neutral, but Daniel sensed judgment underneath. According to your employment records, you've been working service jobs for the past 3 years. Before that, there's a gap in your employment history. What happened during those missing years? Daniel closed his eyes briefly, remembering Sarah's laugh and the way she'd cried when Emma was born and the funeral he'd barely been able to afford. My wife was sick, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Cancer. I took care of her and our daughter until she passed away 3 years ago. For the first time, something flickered across Victoria's face that might have been sympathy. But it was gone so quickly, Daniel wondered if he'd imagined it. I see. And after she died, you decided that serving tables was the best use of your education. The judgment in her tone made anger flare in Daniel's chest. It was the best job I could find that would let me be there for my daughter. Emma needed stability, needed to know that at least one parent wasn't going anywhere. Very noble. Victoria made a note on a pad of paper. But also very limiting. A man with your educational background could be doing much more, earning much more, providing much better for his child. Daniel gripped the arms of his chair, trying to keep his voice steady. What exactly are you getting at, Ms. Ashford? I'm getting at the fact that the copper kettle needs significant changes if it's going to meet our corporate standards. Changes that will require difficult decisions about staffing and operations. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a manila envelope, setting it on the desk between them like a loaded weapon. Which brings me to the real reason you're here, Mr. Brooks. Consider this a test of your character. Daniel's blood turned to ice water. A test. Victoria opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. A termination letter with his name at the top. You're fired effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. Your final paycheck will be mailed to your address on file. The words hit Daniel like physical blows. He stared at the termination letter, at Victoria's calm expression, at the casual way she'd just destroyed his life. I don't understand, he said, his voice cracking. You just said my performance was excellent. You said I was the best server you had. I did. But I also said the restaurant needed changes. Sometimes that means eliminating positions that are no longer cost-effective. Your position has been deemed redundant. Daniel's mind reeled. Redundant? But you just said. I said you were a good server. I didn't say we needed good servers. We need efficient, cost-effective employees who contribute to the bottom line. Sentiment doesn't pay the bills, Mr. Brooks. Daniel stood up on unsteady legs, his entire world collapsing around him. Emma's face flashed through his mind. How was he going to tell her that Daddy had lost his job? How was he going to pay rent? How are they going to eat? Please, he said, hating the desperation in his voice. I need this job. I have a daughter. She depends on me. I understand that you have obligations, but they're not the company's responsibility. Victoria's tone was businesslike, efficient, utterly without compassion. She might have been discussing the weather for all the emotion she showed. Daniel thought about Emma waiting for him at Mrs. Patterson's house, probably working on her homework and expecting him home with a smile and maybe a small surprise. He thought about the bills on his kitchen counter and the empty bank account, and the promises he'd made to always take care of his little girl. Ms. Ashford Daniel said, his voice steadier now. I'm not going to beg you to change your mind. If this is your decision, I'll accept it. But I have one request. Victoria raised an eyebrow. Yes, please don't tell my daughter that I was fired. When she asks why I'm not working at the diner anymore, I'll tell her that Daddy found a new job. She doesn't need to know that her father wasn't good enough to keep the job that feeds her. For a moment, just a moment, Victoria's mask slipped. Something raw and painful flashed across her face before she regained control. That's your request, she asked quietly. That I not tell a 7-year-old that her father was terminated? Yes, Mom. She's been through enough loss in her short life. She doesn't need to know that Daddy failed her too. Daniel straightened his shoulders and walked toward the door with as much dignity as he could muster. When he reached it, he turned back to face Victoria one last time. For what it's worth, Miss Ashford, I hope you never have to understand what it feels like to disappoint someone who believes you can do anything. He left the office, walked through the marble lobby, and drove home to his daughter with hands that shook and a heart that felt like it was breaking all over again. What he didn't see was Victoria Ashford sitting alone in her office, staring at the termination letter with tears streaming down her face. What he didn't know was that she'd just learned something about character that all her father's lessons had never taught her. The test was over, and for the first time in her life, Victoria wasn't sure who had failed it. Victoria sat in her office for 20 minutes after Daniel left, staring at the termination letter she'd never intended to send. Her hands were shaking, and she couldn't seem to stop the tears that kept threatening to spill down her cheeks. Please don't tell my daughter. The words echoed in her mind like an accusation. She'd expected anger, desperation, maybe even pleading. She'd never expected such quiet dignity, such selfless love for a child who would never know that her father had just sacrificed his pride to protect her from disappointment. Victoria had conducted dozens of these tests over the years, following her father's philosophy about revealing true character under pressure. She'd seen people rage, beg, make threats, offer bribes, blame others for their failures. She'd never seen someone worry more about a child's feelings than their own survival. Her intercom buzzed. Ms. Ashford, your 5:30 appointment is here. Cancel it, Victoria said, her voice hoarse. Cancel everything for the rest of the day. Yes, ma'am. Is everything all right? Everything is fine, Jennifer. But everything was not fine. Everything was very far from fine. Victoria pulled out Daniel's employment file again, reading it with different eyes this time. 3 years of perfect attendance, never a single complaint from customers or co-workers, 17 instances of covering for other employees without compensation, consistently high performance ratings from Betty Morrison. And before that, the gaps in employment that now made perfect sense. 2 years caring for a dying wife while raising a small child. 2 years of putting family before career, love before advancement, sacrifice before success. Victoria had never experienced anything like it. She thought about her father, Richard Ashford, who had built their restaurant empire from a single diner in rural Pennsylvania. He'd been a brilliant businessman and a terrible human being, teaching his daughter that sentiment was weakness and compassion was a luxury successful people couldn't afford. Emotions make you vulnerable, Victoria, he'd said countless times throughout her childhood. The moment you start caring about individual people instead of bottom lines, you've lost the war. Her father had tested people constantly, believing that pressure revealed truth. He'd fire employees on a whim to see how they'd react, promote and demote people based on their ability to handle stress rather than their actual qualifications. It was cruel and effective, and it had made him very rich. Victoria had inherited both his business and his philosophy. She'd spent her adult life believing that her father's methods were not only necessary, but virtuous. That testing people under extreme stress was the only way to understand their true character. But Daniel Brooks had just shattered that worldview with 4 simple words. "Please don't tell my daughter." Victoria picked up her phone and dialed Betty Morrison's direct line. "Betty, this is Victoria Ashford. I need to talk to you about Daniel Brooks. What did you do to that boy?" Betty's voice was sharp with protective fury. "He's one of the best employees I've ever had, and if you've hurt him, I'll—" "I made a mistake," Victoria interrupted. "A terrible mistake. Is he working tomorrow?" "Of course he's working tomorrow. Where else would he be?" "Actually, he's not. I terminated him this afternoon." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long that Victoria wondered if the call had been dropped. You did what Betty's voice was deadly quiet. "I fired him, as part of a performance evaluation process." "Performance evaluation, that boy has the best customer service ratings in my restaurant. He's never missed a day, never caused a problem, never done anything but work harder than any person should have to work just to keep food on his table." "I know," Victoria said, and the admission felt like swallowing glass. "I know all of that, but I fired him anyway." "Why?" Betty demanded. "Why would you destroy the life of a man who's already been through hell? Because I wanted to see what kind of person he really was when everything was taken away from him." "And what did you learn?" Victoria closed her eyes, seeing Daniel's face as he'd asked her not to tell Emma the truth. "I learned that he's a better person than I am," Victoria whispered. "I learned that my father was wrong about everything." Betty was quiet for a moment. "Then, what are you going to do about it?" "I'm going to fix it," Victoria said. "If I can." "You better," Betty said fiercely. "Because that man has a 7-year-old daughter who worships the ground he walks on, and she doesn't deserve to suffer because you wanted to play God with people's lives." The line went dead, leaving Victoria alone with her shame, and the growing realization that she'd just committed the cruelest act of her life against the most undeserving person she'd ever met. Victoria spent the rest of the evening in her penthouse apartment, surrounded by luxury that suddenly felt meaningless. She tried to eat dinner but had no appetite. She tried to work but couldn't concentrate. Everything she looked at reminded her of the test she'd conducted and the man she'd hurt in the name of corporate philosophy. At midnight, she made a decision that would have horrified her father and shocked her board of directors. She was going to Riverside Falls. Victoria had never been to the small Ohio town where the Copper Kettle was located. She'd bought the restaurant sight unseen based on financial reports and market analysis. But now she needed to see the place where Daniel Brooks lived, the community he was part of, the life she'd just torn apart with her test. The drive took 3 hours in her BMW through countryside that looked nothing like the corporate landscape she was used to navigating. Riverside Falls was exactly what its name suggested, a small town built around a waterfall that powered an old mill population, 8,500, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and strangers were noticed immediately. The Copper Kettle sat on Main Street between a flower shop and a bookstore, its windows dark at 3 a.m. Victoria parked across the street and stared at the building, trying to imagine Daniel inside serving coffee to people who probably knew his life story, who asked about Emma and remembered his wife's name. This wasn't just a job to him. This was his community, his identity, his daughter's security, and she'd taken it away as casually as she might cancel a lunch meeting. Victoria drove through the quiet streets, looking at the small houses with their front porches and flower gardens, trying to picture Daniel and Emma in one of them. She found the elementary school a brick building that probably hadn't changed much in 50 years, and imagined Emma there with her friends, unaware that her world was about to be turned upside down. At 4 a.m., Victoria finally drove back to Cleveland, but sleep was impossible. She sat in her apartment watching the sunrise over the city, thinking about tests and character and the difference between strength and cruelty. Her father had taught her that successful people made hard choices without sentiment. That business was war, and emotions were weaknesses that the enemy could exploit. That the measure of a leader was their willingness to sacrifice individuals for the greater good of the organization. But what if her father had been wrong? What if real strength meant taking care of people instead of testing them? What if true leadership meant building people up instead of breaking them down to see what they were made of? Victoria had spent 34 years believing her father's philosophy was gospel truth. But Daniel Brooks had just proven that everything she'd been taught about human nature and character and success was a lie. The question now was what she was going to do about it. At 8 a.m., Victoria called her office and told Jennifer to clear her schedule for the day. Then she drove back to Riverside Falls, this time with a purpose. She needed to understand the life she'd damaged. She needed to see Daniel Brooks not as a test subject or an employee, but as a human being whose world she'd just shattered with her arrogance and cruelty. And somehow, if it was possible, she needed to find a way to make it right. The copper kettle was buzzing with the breakfast crowd when Victoria walked in at 8:30 a.m. She'd changed out of her corporate uniform into jeans and a sweater, hoping to blend in, but she still felt like an imposter in this world of working people and genuine community. Betty Morrison spotted her immediately and walked over with the expression of a mother bear protecting her cubs. "You've got some nerve showing up here," Betty said, her voice low but fierce, "after what you did to Danny yesterday." "I know," Victoria said. "I know I don't deserve to be here. But I need to see him. I need to talk to him. He's not here." Victoria's heart sank. Where is he? Probably at home trying to figure out how to tell his daughter that Daddy lost his job. Probably applying for work at every restaurant within 50 miles, even though none of them pay enough to cover his rent. Probably wondering how he's going to afford Emma's school supplies next week. Each word hit Victoria like a physical blow. She thought about her penthouse apartment, her walk-in closet full of clothes that cost more than Daniel's monthly salary, her bank account with more money than she could spend in several lifetimes. "I want to fix this," Victoria said quietly. "I want to make it right." Betty studied her for a long moment, then gestured toward an empty booth. "Sit down. Coffee, please." Betty poured coffee that was strong enough to strip paint and sat across from Victoria, her weathered hands wrapped around her own mug. "You want to know about Danny Brooks," Betty began. "That boy has been through hell and back, and he's still got more kindness in his little finger than most people have in their whole bodies." "Tell me," Victoria said. "His wife Sarah was diagnosed with breast cancer when Emma was 2 years old. Stage 4, aggressive, no hope of recovery. But Danny quit his job anyway to take care of her. Spent 2 years driving her to treatments, holding her hand through chemo, keeping their daughter's world as normal as possible, while his wife slowly died." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes, but Betty wasn't finished. "After Sarah died, Danny had nothing. No savings, no job, no family to help out. Just a 3-year-old who didn't understand why Mommy wouldn't wake up anymore. He moved here because the rent was cheap, and I gave him work, and he's been rebuilding their life piece by piece ever since." Betty leaned forward, her eyes intense. "That man works double shifts without complaining. He covers for other employees when they're sick because he knows they need the money as much as he does. He helps customers carry groceries to their cars, remembers how everyone likes their coffee, asks about people's families, like he actually cares. Because he does care. I see, Victoria said weakly. No, you don't see. You see an employee, a number on a spreadsheet. You don't see a man who reads bedtime stories in different voices to make his daughter laugh, who takes her to the park every Sunday, even when he's exhausted from working 6 days a week, who teaches her about dinosaurs and dragons and why it's important to be kind to people even when they're not kind to you. Victoria's chest felt tight. Betty, He's the best man I know, Betty continued. And you fired him to see what kind of person he was. Well, congratulations, honey. You found out. He's the kind of person who worries more about his daughter's feelings than his own survival. He's the kind of person who says please and thank you even when his world is falling apart. He's the kind of person your fancy tests could never measure because goodness isn't something you can put in a spreadsheet. Victoria sat in silence, letting Betty's words wash over her like cold water. She thought about all the people she'd tested over the years, all the lives she'd disrupted in the name of corporate efficiency. She thought about her father's lessons about strength and weakness, about the necessity of hard choices and emotional detachment. She thought about Daniel Brooks asking her not to tell his daughter the truth. I was wrong, Victoria said finally. Everything I did, everything I believed about people and business and leadership, it was all wrong. Betty's expression softened slightly. What are you going to do about it? I don't know. Victoria looked around the diner at people eating breakfast and talking quietly and living their lives with a simplicity she'd never known. But I want to learn. I want to understand what I've been missing. That evening, Victoria found herself sitting in her car outside a small house on Maple Street, watching through lit windows as Daniel helped Emma with what looked like homework. She'd gotten the address from employee records, and now she was paralyzed by the weight of what she'd done and the impossibility of undoing it. Through the kitchen window, she could see Emma at a small table, papers spread around her, gesturing enthusiastically as she explained something to her father. Daniel was smiling, nodding, completely engaged despite whatever stress he must be feeling about his lost job. Victoria watched this intimate scene of family life and felt a longing she'd never experienced before. She'd grown up with nannies and boarding schools, with a father who measured her worth by her achievements, and a mother who'd died when Victoria was too young to remember her love. She'd never had someone read her bedtime stories in different voices. She'd never had someone worry more about her feelings than their own success. She'd never been anyone's whole world, the way Emma was clearly Daniel's entire universe. As Victoria watched, Emma said something that made Daniel throw back his head and laugh. The sound carried through the closed windows and settled in Victoria's chest like warmth. When was the last time she'd laughed like that? When was the last time anyone had made her laugh like that? Daniel stood up to get something from the refrigerator, and for a moment his face turned toward the window. Even from across the street, Victoria could see the exhaustion in his features, the weight of responsibility and worry that he was carrying alone. She'd done that to him. She'd added to his burden with her test, her corporate philosophy, her father's cruel lessons about human nature. Victoria started her car and drove back to her hotel, but she didn't sleep. Instead, she lay awake thinking about tests and character and the possibility that the strongest people weren't the ones who passed every challenge, but the ones who faced them with love instead of fear. The next morning, Victoria returned to the Copper Kettle, but not as a CEO conducting evaluations. She came as a customer ordering coffee and sitting in the corner booth where she could observe the rhythms of this small-town community. She watched Betty greet customers by name, asking about their families and their jobs with genuine interest. She watched Frank Patterson hold court at the counter, telling stories about the old days to anyone who would listen. She watched Mrs. Henderson struggle with arthritic hands to count out exact change, and saw how the waitress quietly helped without making her feel embarrassed. This wasn't just a restaurant. It was the heart of a community, a place where people came not just for food, but for connection, for the comfort of being known and cared about. And she'd almost destroyed it with her test. Victoria was finishing her second cup of coffee when she heard a commotion outside. Through the window, she saw Daniel's old Honda pulled up to the curb, and her heart started racing. But instead of Daniel, Emma climbed out of the passenger seat, followed by an elderly woman Victoria recognized as Mrs. Patterson from the employee files. Emma burst through the diner door like a small whirlwind, her backpack bouncing as she ran straight to Betty. Mrs. Betty, Emma announced, "Daddy said I could come say hi while Mrs. Patterson gets her groceries." "Is he working today?" Victoria watched Betty's face crumple with pain. The older woman knelt down to Emma's level, her voice gentle. "Not today, sweetheart. Your daddy had to go take care of some things. When will he be back?" Emma asked her 7-year-old mind, not yet grasping that this wasn't temporary. "I'm not sure, honey, but he loves you very much, and everything's going to be okay." Emma nodded seriously, then brightened. "Can I have a cookie? The dinosaur-shaped ones?" "Of course you can." As Betty went to get Emma's cookie, the little girl spotted Victoria in the corner booth. Without hesitation, Emma walked over with the fearless curiosity of childhood. "Hi, Emma," said. "I'm Emma Brooks. I don't think I've seen you before." "Are you new in town?" Victoria's throat closed up. Up close, Emma looked even more like the photograph in Daniel's employee file. Blonde hair in pigtails, bright blue eyes full of intelligence and joy, small hands that gestured as she talked. "Hi, Emma," Victoria managed. "I'm Victoria. I'm just visiting." "That's nice. Where are you visiting from Cleveland?" Victoria said the word, feeling heavy. "That's where my daddy went yesterday," Emma said, matter-of-factly. "He had a work meeting. He was kind of nervous about it, but he said sometimes grown-ups have to do scary things for good reasons." Victoria felt like she might be sick. "Did he tell you about the meeting?" "Not really. Just that he had to talk to some important people about work stuff, but he promised to tell me all about it when he got home." Emma leaned closer conspiratorially. "Between you and me, I think Daddy worries too much about boring grown-up things. But I always tell him that everything works out in the end, especially if you're really good like he is." The innocence in Emma's voice, her absolute faith that her father would take care of everything. Her certainty that good people got good outcomes broke something inside Victoria's chest. "Your daddy sounds like a very good person," Victoria said, her voice thick. "He's the best person in the whole world," Emma said, with the conviction only a child could muster. "He reads me stories every night and makes me lunch in the shape of animals and knows everything about dinosaurs. Well, almost everything. We're still learning about the ones that lived in water." Victoria found herself smiling despite the pain in her chest. "What's your favorite dinosaur?" "That's easy. Triceratops, because they had 3 horns for protection, but they only ate plants, so they were strong but not mean." "Daddy says that's the best way to be." Mrs. Patterson appeared at Victoria's elbow, her expression protective. "Emma, honey, we need to get going. Your daddy will be wondering where you are." "Okay, Mrs. Patterson." Emma turned back to Victoria. "It was nice meeting you, Victoria, from Cleveland. I hope you like our town. It's the best place in the world to live, even though we don't have a movie theater anymore." As Victoria watched Emma leave, skipping beside Mrs. Patterson without a care in the world, she made a decision that would have shocked her board of directors and horrified her father. She was going to fix this. Not just Daniel's job, not just the test she'd conducted, but all of it. The corporate philosophy that had led her to think testing people's pain was acceptable. The distance she'd created between herself and the human cost of her decisions. The cold efficiency that her father had taught her to mistake for strength. Victoria Ashford was going to learn what Daniel Brooks had tried to teach her about character, and she was going to start by figuring out how to be worthy of Emma's faith that good people got good outcomes, even if it meant admitting that she'd been one of the bad people all along. That afternoon, Victoria made a phone call that would change everything. Daniel. "This is Victoria Ashford. I need to see you again. There's something I have to tell you." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long that Victoria thought he'd hung up. "Ms. Ashford," Daniel said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "I think you've said everything you needed to say." "No," Victoria said, surprising herself with the emotion in her voice. "I haven't said anything that mattered. Please, give me one more chance." Another long pause. "Emma's at soccer practice until 6. I can meet you at the park afterward, but Ms. Ashford, if this is about offering me some other position out of guilt, I'm not interested in charity." "It's not charity," Victoria said. "It's an apology and an explanation. And maybe if you'll let me a chance to make things right." At 6:30 p.m., Victoria found herself sitting on a park bench watching Daniel push Emma on a swing set that had seen better days. The little girl's laughter carried across the playground, pure and joyful, while her father's attention was focused entirely on her happiness. Victoria had been watching for 20 minutes, working up the courage to approach them, when Emma spotted her and waved enthusiastically. "Victoria from Cleveland," Emma called out. "Daddy, this is the lady I met at Mrs. Betty's today. She's visiting our town." Daniel's expression shifted when he saw Victoria confusion and wariness replacing the relaxed joy he'd shown with his daughter. "Emma, sweetheart, why don't you go play on the monkey bars for a few minutes?" Victoria said gently. "I need to talk to your daddy about some boring grown-up things." "Okay," Emma agreed cheerfully. "But don't be too long. Daddy promised to help me practice my presentation about velociraptors tonight." As Emma ran off toward the playground equipment, Daniel walked over to the bench where Victoria sat, his posture tense. "What do you want?" "Ms. Ashford." Victoria took a deep breath. "I want to tell you the truth about yesterday. All of it." For the next 10 minutes, Victoria told Daniel everything. About her father's philosophy regarding tests of character, about the corporate culture that rewarded emotional detachment and punished empathy, about the dozens of similar tests she'd conducted over the years, always believing she was identifying strong employees and weeding out weak ones. It was never real, she concluded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your termination was never real. It was a test to see how you'd react under extreme pressure." Daniel was quiet for so long that Victoria began to wonder if he'd heard her. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat and cold. "A test. Yes, you destroyed my sense of security, made me question my worth, forced me to figure out how to tell my daughter that her father had failed her all, so you could see what kind of person I was." Victoria couldn't meet his eyes. "Yes. And what did you learn? That I'm not fit to judge anyone's character?" Victoria said quietly. "That everything I thought I knew about strength and weakness and human nature was wrong. That my father raised me to be cruel and call it leadership." Daniel stood up abruptly and walked a few steps away, his hands clenched into fists. Victoria could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he was fighting to control his anger. "Do you have any idea what you put me through?" he asked, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "Do you know what it's like to lose your job when you have a child depending on you, when you're already living paycheck to paycheck, and one missed payment means you could lose your home?" Victoria felt tears burning her eyes. "No, I don't know what that's like. I've never worried about money or security or whether I could take care of someone I love. I've never had to be strong for anyone but myself." "That's right." Daniel turned to face her, and Victoria was shocked by the pain in his eyes. You've never had to be strong for someone else. You've never had to put another person's well-being ahead of your own pride. You've never had to smile and say thank you while someone destroys your life just to see how you'll handle it. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, Victoria said, but I need you to know that your response to the test, the way you worried about Emma instead of yourself, it changed something in me. It showed me what real character looks like. My response. Daniel laughed bitterly. My response was to beg you not to hurt my daughter's feelings. That's what you call character. Yes, Victoria said firmly. That's exactly what I call character. You faced what you thought was the loss of everything, and your first concern was protecting a 7-year-old from disappointment. You asked me to lie to spare her feelings, even though it meant accepting shame you didn't deserve. Daniel stared at her, and Victoria saw some of the unsurrender drain from his expression. Most people would have raged at me, Victoria continued. They would have demanded explanations, made threats, blamed everyone but themselves. You asked me to be kind to your daughter. In that moment, you taught me more about strength than 34 years of my father's lessons ever did. From across the playground, Emma called out, "Daddy, watch this," and proceeded to cross the monkey bars with impressive determination. Daniel waved and smiled automatically, shifting into the encouraging father Emma needed him to be. She doesn't know, does she? Victoria asked. About any of this? No, and she's not going to. Daniel's voice was firm. As far as Emma knows, Daddy is looking for a new job because sometimes that's what happens in life. She doesn't need to know about tests or corporate games or people who think it's acceptable to torture others for their own education. You're still protecting her, Victoria said, with something like wonder. Even from me. That's what parents do, Daniel said simply. We shield our children from the ugliness in the world for as long as we can. We let them believe that people are good and life is fair and everything works out in the end because that innocence is precious and they'll lose it soon enough without our help. Victoria thought about her own childhood, about a father who'd taught her that the world was brutal and weak people got crushed and emotions were liabilities. She'd never been allowed the innocence that Daniel was fighting to preserve for Emma. I want to give you your job back, Victoria said, and a raise and better benefits and a formal apology to the entire staff for what I put you through. Daniel shook his head. I don't want anything from you, Ms. Ashford. I don't want to work for someone who thinks testing people's pain is an acceptable management technique. I don't want to spend my days wondering what new corporate game you'll decide to play with people's lives. Please, Victoria said, and the word came out more desperate than she'd intended. Let me make this right. You can't make it right, Daniel said quietly. You can't undo the hours I spent yesterday figuring out how to keep a roof over my daughter's head. You can't take back the fear you put me through, the questions you made me ask about my worth as a provider and a father. He paused, watching Emma navigate the playground with fearless joy. But most of all, you can't give me back my faith that there are still good people in positions of power, people who understand that every decision they make affects real families with real struggles and real dreams. Victoria felt something break inside her chest. You're right, she said. I can't undo any of it, but I can change. I can learn to be better. Can you? Daniel asked, genuine curiosity, replacing some of the anger in his voice. Can someone really change when they've spent their whole life believing that cruelty is strength? I don't know, Victoria admitted. But I want to try. Yesterday, when you asked me not to tell Emma the truth, you showed me something I'd never seen before. Love that puts someone else's well-being ahead of your own pride. Strength that comes from protecting instead of conquering. Goodness that doesn't need to be tested because it simply exists. She stood up, facing him directly. I've spent my entire career testing people to find their breaking points. But you didn't break, Daniel. You bent to protect someone smaller and more vulnerable than yourself, and in doing that, you broke me instead. You broke everything I thought I knew about leadership and power and what it means to be strong. Daniel studied her face, and Victoria could see him trying to determine whether her words were genuine or just another corporate manipulation. "What do you want from me?" he asked finally. "I want you to teach me," Victoria said. "I want you to show me what I've been missing. I want to understand how you built a life based on love instead of fear, how you found strength in sacrifice instead of conquest." She gestured toward Emma, who was now attempting to teach a small dog to play fetch. "I want to learn how to see people the way you see Emma. Not as resources to be managed or problems to be solved, but as human beings worthy of kindness and protection and care." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, watching his daughter with the patient attention of someone who'd learned that children's joy was more precious than any corporate achievement. "That's not something you can learn in a seminar or a workshop," he said finally. "It's not a technique you can master and add to your management toolkit." "I know," Victoria said. "That's why I'm asking you to teach me. Not as an employee or a test subject, but as someone who genuinely wants to understand what it means to be good." Emma came running back to them, the small dog trailing behind her, with its tongue hanging out. "Daddy, this is Buster," Emma announced. "He belongs to Mr. Williams, but Mr. Williams said I could play with him if I was gentle. And guess what? He already knows how to sit and shake hands, but he doesn't know how to roll over yet. Can we teach him?" "Of course we can, sweetheart," Daniel said, his entire demeanor softening as he focused on his daughter. "But we'll have to ask Mr. Williams first." As Emma ran off to find the dog's owner, Victoria watched the interaction with something like awe. Daniel's love for his daughter was so pure, so uncomplicated, so completely focused on her happiness rather than his own needs. "How do you do it?" Victoria asked quietly. "How do you love someone that much without losing yourself?" Daniel looked at her with surprise. "You don't lose yourself," he said. "You find yourself. Everything I am, everything good about me comes from being Emma's father. She made me braver, kinder, stronger than I ever thought I could be. But what about your dreams, your ambitions, the future you planned before she came along?" "Those weren't my dreams," Daniel said simply. "They were just things I thought I wanted because I didn't know what real purpose felt like. Emma is my purpose. Taking care of her, watching her grow, helping her become the amazing person she already is. That's not a sacrifice. That's a gift." Victoria felt tears threaten again, but this time they weren't tears of guilt or shame. They were tears of longing for something she'd never known she was missing. "I've never felt that way about anything," she admitted. "I've never loved something more than my own success. Maybe that's because you've never had anything worth loving more than your success," Daniel said gently. "But that doesn't mean you can't learn." Emma came bounding back with Mr. Williams in tow, an elderly man with kind eyes and a patient smile who seemed completely charmed by the enthusiastic 7-year-old. "Mr. Williams says we can teach Buster to roll over if we use treats," Emma reported. "He also says Buster is probably the smartest dog in the whole town, but he might just be saying that to be nice." "Buster is definitely very smart," Victoria found herself saying. "I can tell by the way he listens when you talk to him." Emma beamed at her. "See, Daddy, Victoria knows about dogs too. Maybe she can help us train Buster." Daniel met Victoria's eyes over his daughter's head, and something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. "Would you like to help us train Buster?" Daniel asked quietly. "I'd like that very much," Victoria said. "If you don't mind teaching someone who's never trained a dog before." "That's okay," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Daddy didn't know how to braid hair before he had to learn for me, and now he's really good at it. Well, pretty good. Sometimes my ponytails are a little crooked, but I don't mind because they're made with love." Victoria looked at Daniel. This man who'd learned to braid hair and make lunches in the shape of animals and explain complex emotions to a curious child, all because someone small and precious depended on him to figure it out. Maybe that's what love really meant. Not grand gestures or perfect performance, but the willingness to learn new skills, to grow in unexpected directions, to become better than you thought you could be, because someone else needed you to try. As the sun began to set over the small Tull town playground, Victoria found herself sitting on a park bench with Daniel and Emma, watching a dog named Buster learn to roll over for treats. She was wearing jeans instead of a power suit, laughing at a 7-year-old's jokes instead of reviewing quarterly reports. And for the first time in her adult life, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. Daniel was still wary, still hurt by what she'd done. But it was a beginning, a small crack in the wall of anger and disappointment that she'd built with her test. And maybe if she was very lucky and worked very hard to deserve it, that small crack might eventually become a door. The next few weeks passed in a strange rhythm that Victoria had never experienced before. Instead of flying back to Cleveland and resuming her corporate schedule, she found herself staying in Riverside Falls, booking an extended stay at the town's small bed and breakfast. Every morning she walked to the Copper Kettle for coffee, not as a CEO conducting evaluations, but as a customer learning to see the diner through different eyes. She watched Betty greet each patron by name, remembered how they liked their eggs, asked about their children and grandchildren with genuine interest. This is how you build loyalty, Victoria realized. Not through corporate incentives or performance metrics, but through the simple act of making people feel seen and valued. Every afternoon she found herself at the playground where Emma and Daniel spent time after school and work. At first Daniel was polite, but distant, clearly unsure of Victoria's motives. But Emma, with the open heart of childhood, had decided that Victoria was their friend and treated her accordingly. Victoria from Cleveland. Emma would call out whenever she spotted her. "Come see what Buster learned today," or "Look at the picture I drew of velociraptors," or "Daddy says you know about numbers and business stuff. Can you help me with my math homework?" Slowly, carefully, Victoria began to understand what she'd been missing her entire life. She watched Daniel help Emma with multiplication tables, his patience infinite as he explained the same concept 5 different ways until it clicked. She saw how he celebrated Emma's small victories, how he comforted her minor defeats, how every decision he made was filtered through the question of what would be best for his daughter. One evening as they walked home from the playground, Emma slipped her small hand into Victoria's with the casual intimacy of a child who'd decided to trust someone. "Victoria," Emma said thoughtfully. "Do you have any kids?" "No, sweetheart." "I don't." "How come? Are you too busy with work?" Victoria glanced at Daniel, who was listening quietly. She could give Emma a simple answer. Change the subject. Maintain the professional distance she'd always kept from personal questions. But Emma's innocent curiosity deserved honesty. "I used to think work was more important than having a family," Victoria said carefully. "I thought success meant being the best at my job, even if it meant being alone. But now you don't think that anymore." Victoria stopped walking and knelt down to Emma's level the way she'd seen Daniel do countless times. "Now I think I was wrong about a lot of things," Victoria said. "Your daddy taught me that the most important success isn't about money or power. It's about taking care of the people you love." Emma nodded seriously. "Daddy always says that love is the most important thing, even more important than knowing all about dinosaurs, and that's saying a lot, because dinosaurs are really, really important. Victoria felt her eyes burn with tears. She looked up at Daniel, who was watching the interaction with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Your daddy is very wise," Victoria said to Emma. "I'm still learning the things he already knows." "That's okay," Emma said with the generous forgiveness of childhood. "Grown-ups have to learn stuff too sometimes. Daddy didn't always know how to make French toast, but he learned because I really wanted some for my birthday breakfast." As they resumed walking, Emma chattering about French toast techniques and birthday traditions, Victoria found herself thinking about the word home. She'd lived in expensive apartments and penthouses, always choosing them for their investment potential or proximity to work. But walking through this small town with a 7-year-old's hand in hers and a man's quiet presence beside her, Victoria finally understood what home actually meant. It wasn't a place. It was people who cared whether you made it safely through another day. It was someone who remembered how you liked your coffee and asked about the things that worried you and celebrated the small victories you thought no one else would care about. It was Emma pointing out interesting clouds and Daniel quietly making sure Victoria knew she was welcome to join their evening routine, and the growing certainty that she wanted to be part of this family more than she'd ever wanted any corporate promotion. But wanting something and deserving it were very different things. And Victoria knew she had a lot of work to do before she'd earned the right to call this feeling anything other than hope. 3 weeks after the test that changed everything, Victoria made a decision that would have been unthinkable a month earlier. She called her assistant in Cleveland and told her to cancel all meetings for the following week. Then she walked to the copper kettle, found Betty wiping down tables in the mid-afternoon lull, and asked for a job. Betty stared at her like she'd announced her intention to join the circus. "You want to do what now?" "I want to work here," Victoria said. "As a waitress, dishwasher, whatever you need. I want to learn how this place really works from the ground up." "Honey," Betty said carefully, "you own a chain of restaurants. You make more money in a month than I see in a year. Why would you want to serve coffee and wash dishes?" "Because I've never actually worked in a restaurant," Victoria admitted. "I've managed them from boardrooms and corner offices, but I've never done the actual work. I don't know what it feels like to be on your feet for 8 hours, to deal with difficult customers, to depend on tips to pay your bills. And you want to learn that why? Because I can't lead people through experiences I've never had myself. Because I want to understand what I'm asking of my employees when I make corporate decisions. Because I want to be worthy of the trust you're all placing in me when you let me own the place where you work." Betty was quiet for a long moment, studying Victoria's face with the shrewd eyes of someone who'd been reading people for 63 years. "This have anything to do with Danny Brooks?" "Everything," Victoria said honestly. "He showed me that real leadership means taking care of people, not testing them. But I can't take care of people if I don't understand their lives, their challenges, their daily reality." Betty poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down across from Victoria in one of the worn vinyl booths. "All right," she said finally. "But if you're going to work here, you're going to really work. No special treatment, no corporate privileges. You'll start at minimum wage work, whatever shifts I give you, and deal with whatever customers throw at you. And if you can't handle it, you're out. I understand." "And another thing," Betty continued, her tone stern, but not unkind. "Danny doesn't know about this yet, does he?" "No. I wanted to talk to you first." "Good. Because that boy has been through enough. If you're doing this as some kind of elaborate gesture to win him over, you can forget it right now. He's too good a man to be manipulated by grand romantic gestures from someone who hurt him as badly as you did." "It's not a gesture," Victoria said quietly. "It's an education. I need to learn how to be the kind of person who deserves to be in his life, in Emma's life. And I can't do that by reading reports or conducting interviews. I have to do the work. Betty nodded slowly. When do you want to start tomorrow morning, if that's all right with you? The next morning at 5:30 a.m., Victoria arrived at the Copper Kettle wearing the only casual clothes she owned and tennis shoes she'd bought at the local department store the night before. Betty handed her an apron, a notepad, and a crash course in the restaurant business that no MBA program had ever taught her. By 7 a.m., Victoria had burned herself twice on the coffee pot, mixed up 3 orders, and discovered that her feet hurt more than she'd thought possible. By 9 a.m., she was beginning to understand why Daniel had looked so exhausted during those early morning shifts she'd observed from her corner booth. By 11 a.m., she was starting to get the rhythm of it. Coffee first, always coffee first, especially for the construction workers who needed caffeine more than they needed conversation. Remember who takes cream, who wants sugar, who drinks it black, like motor oil, and proud of it. Watch the way Frank Patterson holds his arthritic hands move the coffee cup closer so he doesn't have to reach. Notice that Mrs. Henderson counts out exact change carefully, and don't rush her even when there's a line. Ask about Mr. Chen's grandson, who's applying to colleges because Mr. Chen lit up when Daniel remembered to ask last week. It was exhausting and humbling and completely different from anything Victoria had ever experienced. But it was also illuminating in ways she hadn't expected. She began to understand the complex social dynamics of the diner, the way regular customers had their own tables and preferred waitresses the unspoken rules about who sat where and when. She learned that Mrs. Patterson always ordered pie, but never finished it, because she really just wanted company, and that Frank's complaints about the government were his way of starting conversations with anyone who'd listen. She discovered that the teenage busboy Marcus was saving every penny for art school, and that the part-time cook Elena was supporting 3 kids on her own after her husband left. Most importantly, she began to understand that every person who walked through the diner doors had a story. Struggles, dreams that went far beyond their orders for coffee and eggs. They weren't just customers generating revenue. They were people deserving of kindness and attention and respect. On her 3rd day working the breakfast shift, Daniel walked in for his morning coffee break and stopped dead when he saw Victoria behind the counter, her hair escaping from a ponytail and her apron stained with coffee. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Learning," Victoria said, pouring his coffee the way she'd watched Betty do it. "Black 2 sugars cream on the side in case you change your mind." Daniel accepted the coffee but didn't move away from the counter. "Victoria, you don't need to do this." "Yes, I do," Victoria said firmly. "I need to understand what I've been managing from a distance. I need to know what it feels like to work for the decisions I make in corporate boardrooms. And I need to prove to myself that I can do honest work that helps people, instead of testing them or manipulating them or treating them like variables in a business equation." Daniel sipped his coffee, and Victoria was relieved to see that she'd gotten it right. "Betty says you're doing okay for someone who's never worked a service job before," he said finally. "High praise from Betty Morrison. She also says you're not doing this to impress anyone or make some kind of point. Is that true?" Victoria met his eyes steadily. "I'm doing this because I want to be worthy of the life I'm hoping to build here. I want to be the kind of person Emma would be proud to know, the kind of person you might eventually be able to forgive." Daniel was quiet for a moment, watching her face. Then he said something that made Victoria's heart skip. "Emma keeps asking when you're coming to dinner. She's decided you need to try my famous spaghetti and meatballs, which are neither famous nor particularly good, but she's very proud of the recipe we developed together." Victoria felt tears threaten. "She's been asking about dinner every night this week. Apparently you told her that families eat together, and she's decided that means you should eat with us." "Out of the mouths of babes," Victoria said softly. "She's very determined when she sets her mind on something." Daniel's expression was still cautious, but Victoria detected a hint of warmth beneath the wariness. "Would you like to come tomorrow night after your shift here? Nothing fancy. just spaghetti and salad, and Emma's endless commentary about everything that happened at school. Victoria's throat closed up with emotion. I would love that more than anything in the world. Good, because I have a feeling Emma's going to keep asking until you say yes, and that girl can be very persistent when she wants something. As Daniel left to return to his own job search, Victoria realized that something fundamental had shifted between them. She wasn't forgiven, not yet, but she was no longer the enemy. She was someone who was trying, someone who was learning, someone who might eventually earn her way back into their lives. That evening, as Victoria walked home from her first successful full shift at the Copper Kettle, her feet aching and her back sore, but her heart lighter than it had been in years, she thought about the invitation to dinner. It wasn't a grand gesture or a romantic gesture. It was something simpler and more precious than that. It was a chance to be part of a family dinner, to sit around a table and hear about Emma's day and help clean up afterward, and maybe begin to understand what she'd been missing her entire life. Victoria had spent 34 years climbing corporate ladders and accumulating wealth and power, but walking through the quiet streets of Riverside Falls with her hands smelling like coffee and her apron pocket full of modest tips, she realized that all of that success had been hollow. This simple tiredness from honest work, this sense of being useful to people who needed what she could provide, this hope that she might be welcomed into a family that had already survived more loss than anyone should have to endure, this was what success actually felt like. Tomorrow night she would sit at Daniel's kitchen table and try Emma's favorite pasta and probably say the wrong things because she'd never been part of a real family dinner. But she would be there, present and grateful and committed to learning how to love people instead of testing them. It was the most important job interview of her life, and for once Victoria was prepared to fail gracefully if it meant she might eventually learn to succeed at the things that actually mattered. The dinner invitation led to something Victoria had never experienced: a normal family evening. She arrived at Daniel's small house at 6 o'clock carrying a bottle of wine that had cost more than Daniel probably spent on groceries in a week, then realized her mistake and left it in the car. Emma answered the door wearing an apron that was clearly too big for her and a smile that could have powered the entire town. "Victoria, you came. Daddy said you might be too tired from working all day, but I told him that family dinners give you energy instead of taking it away. Come see what we're making." Victoria followed Emma into a kitchen that was tiny compared to her penthouse, but filled with warmth and the smell of garlic and tomatoes. Daniel stood at the stove stirring a pot of sauce, his sleeves rolled up and a dish towel thrown over his shoulder. "Welcome to Chaos Central," Daniel said with a smile that reached his eyes for the first time since Victoria had met him. "Emma's been cooking supervisor all afternoon, which means everything takes twice as long but tastes 3 times better because it's made with love." "I supervised really good, Emma," announced proudly. "I made sure Daddy didn't burn the garlic again, and I helped roll all the meatballs into perfect circles. Well, mostly perfect. Some of them are more like ovals, but Daddy says that just makes them unique." Victoria watched this father-daughter team work together with the easy rhythm of people who'd done this hundreds of times before, and felt a pang of longing so sharp it nearly took her breath away. She'd eaten in Michelin-starred restaurants and attended corporate dinners that cost more than most people made in a month, but she'd never experienced anything like this simple joy of cooking together. "Can I help with anything?" Victoria asked. "You can set the table," Emma said, already assuming command. "The plates are in that cupboard, and the forks are in the drawer by the sink. But be careful with the glasses because they're not fancy, like what you're probably used to, but Daddy says they hold water just as good as expensive ones." As Victoria set the small table, she listened to Emma's running commentary about proper table setting. Her theories about why pasta was better than pizza, and her elaborate plans for teaching Buster the dog to play hide-and-seek. The conversation was completely ordinary and absolutely magical. This was what families sounded like, Victoria realized. Not boardroom discussions about quarterly projections or strategic planning sessions disguised as social dinners, but genuine interest in each other's daily experiences, gentle teasing, and the comfortable assumption that everyone at the table mattered. Over dinner, Emma regaled Victoria with detailed accounts of her day at school, including a comprehensive analysis of the playground politics surrounding the best swings and an earnest explanation of why her teacher was probably the smartest person in the world, except for maybe Daddy, and now Victoria too. "What do you think dinosaurs would eat if they were alive today?" Emma asked seriously, twirling spaghetti around her fork with the concentrated effort of someone still mastering the technique. "I think they'd probably love pizza," Victoria said, surprising herself by entering into Emma's elaborate hypothetical scenarios. Especially the herbivores. All those vegetables on top would be like a dinosaur salad. "That's exactly what I was thinking," Emma beamed. "See, Daddy Victoria understands about dinosaurs. I told you she was smart." Daniel's eyes met Victoria's across the table, and she saw something that made her heart skip. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition. He was seeing her interact with his daughter with genuine warmth and interest, not the polite but distant attention of someone humoring a child. After dinner, Emma insisted that Victoria help with her bedtime routine, showing her the elaborate ritual that involved choosing the perfect stuffed animal for the night, reviewing the day's best moments, and selecting just the right book for Daddy to read. "This is my favorite book about dragons," Emma explained, holding up a well-worn picture book. "It's about a dragon who breathes flowers instead of fire, and everyone thinks that makes her weird, but really it makes her special because she can help gardens grow." "That sounds like a wonderful kind of dragon to be," Victoria said, sitting on the edge of Emma's bed while Daniel settled into the chair they'd obviously used for bedtime stories countless times before. "It is," Emma agreed solemnly. "The dragon learns that being different isn't bad, it's just different. And sometimes different is exactly what the world needs." As Daniel read the story in voices that made Emma giggle and gasp in all the right places, Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. This was love in action, she realized. Not grand gestures or expensive gifts, but showing up every single night to read stories and chase away monsters and help a little girl believe that the world was good and safe and full of possibilities. After Emma was tucked in with kisses and promises that they'd practice training. Buster tomorrow, Victoria and Daniel found themselves standing in the quiet living room, suddenly aware that they were alone together for the first time since their conversation in the park. "Thank you," Victoria said quietly, "for letting me be part of this, for trusting me with Emma's bedtime routine, for showing me what a real family looks like." Daniel was quiet for a moment, studying her face. "You were good with her tonight. Natural. She clearly adores you, and Emma doesn't trust people easily after everything she's been through." "She's amazing," Victoria said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "Wise and funny and kind and absolutely fearless. She gets all of that from you." "Not all of it." Daniel's voice was soft with memory. "Sarah was the brave one, the one who could make anyone laugh, who saw magic in ordinary moments. Emma inherited the best parts of both of us, I think." It was the first time Daniel had mentioned his late wife to Victoria, and she understood what a gift that was. He was letting her see not just his present life, but the foundation it was built on, the love that had created Emma and shaped Daniel into the man he'd become. "Sarah would have liked you," Daniel said, surprising Victoria completely. She always said the most important thing about a person wasn't what they achieved, but how they treated people who couldn't do anything for them. Tonight, watching you with Emma, seeing how you listened to her, like her thoughts were important, how you entered into her imagination without condescending to her. I think Sarah would have approved." Victoria felt tears escape, despite her attempts to control them. "That means more to me than you know," she said. I've never been around children before. I didn't know how to talk to them or what they needed. But Emma makes it easy because she's so open and generous and willing to forgive, like her father, Victoria thought, but didn't say. She's teaching me things I never learned, Victoria continued, about trust and innocence, and the kind of love that doesn't keep score or demand perfect performance. Daniel moved closer, close enough that Victoria could see the exhaustion lines around his eyes, the worry he carried for Emma's future, the hope he was afraid to acknowledge. "Victoria," he said quietly, "what are you looking for here? In this town with us, with this job at the diner. What do you want this to become?" Victoria took a shaky breath. She could give him the safe answer, the one that wouldn't scare him away or put pressure on the fragile connection they were building. Or she could risk everything by telling him the truth. "I want a life," she said finally. "A real life with people I love and who love me back. I want to wake up every morning knowing that what I do matters to someone other than shareholders and board members. I want to be Emma's friend, and maybe someday something more. I want to earn the right to be part of your family, if you'll let me try." Daniel studied her face for a long moment, and Victoria held her breath. "It's not going to be easy," he said finally. "I've been hurt before, badly. And Emma's been through enough loss. I can't let anyone into our lives who isn't absolutely certain they want to be here." "I understand," Victoria said. "And I can't promise I'll be perfect at this because I've never done it before. But I can promise that I'll show up every day and do my best to be worthy of your trust." Daniel reached out and took her hand, the first physical contact they'd shared since that disastrous day in her office. "Then maybe we can figure it out together," he said softly. "One day at a time." Victoria felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the wine they'd shared with dinner and everything to do with the possibility that she might finally be home. As they stood in Daniel's living room, holding hands and making tentative promises about the future, Victoria thought about the test she'd conducted weeks ago. She'd wanted to see Daniel's character under pressure, never realizing that he would reveal hers in return. The test hadn't destroyed him, it had transformed her. And now, if she was very lucky and worked very hard to deserve it, they might both pass the only exam that really mattered. Learning to love without fear, to trust without guarantees, and to build a family from the beautiful wreckage of their perfectly imperfect lives. 3 months later, on the first Thanksgiving, Victoria had ever spent with a real family. She found herself in Betty's kitchen, helping prepare dinner for what seemed like half the town. The copper kettle was closed for the holiday, but Betty's house was open to anyone who needed a place to belong. Victoria was learning to mash potatoes under Betty's watchful supervision, while Emma helped by offering running commentary on proper mashing technique and stealing tastes of everything within reach. "Not too lumpy, but not too smooth either," Emma instructed seriously. "Daddy likes them with just a little texture because he says it reminds him that food comes from real potatoes and not a box." "Very wise advice," Victoria agreed, trying not to laugh at Emma's solemn expression. "Your daddy is clearly a potato expert." "He's an expert at lots of things," Emma said proudly. "He can fix hairbands when they break and make pancakes that look like animals and explain why the sky is blue in a way that makes sense. Plus, he's really good at hugs when you have bad dreams." Victoria felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came whenever Emma talked about Daniel's parenting skills. Over the past 3 months, she'd watched him navigate everything from scraped knees to friendship drama, to Emma's existential crisis about whether dinosaurs had feelings, all with patience and wisdom that made Victoria question everything she thought she knew about strength. "Speaking of your daddy," Victoria said, glancing toward the living room where Daniel was deep in conversation with Frank Patterson about the best way to winterize a garden. "I think these potatoes are ready for his expert opinion." Emma ran off to fetch Daniel, and Victoria took a moment to absorb the scene around her. Betty's kitchen was small and dated nothing like the designer kitchens Victoria was used to, but it was filled with warmth and laughter and the comfortable chaos of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Mrs. Henderson was arguing good-naturedly with Dr. Chen about the proper temperature for roasting turkey. Marcus, the teenage busboy from the diner, was teaching Mrs. Patterson's grandson how to fold napkins into fancy shapes. Elena, the part-time cook, was sharing pictures of her children with anyone who'd listen. This was community, Victoria realized, not networking events or corporate retreats designed to build team unity, but genuine affection and mutual support that had grown naturally over years of shared experiences. "The potatoes look perfect," Daniel said, appearing at Victoria's elbow with Emma in tow. "Though I suspect that has more to do with your excellent supervision than my mashing skills." "I had the best teacher," Victoria said, smiling at Emma. "Who knew that potato expertise was hereditary?" "It's not hereditary," Emma corrected seriously. "It's learned. Like most important things. Right, Daddy? Right, sweetheart? The best things in life aren't things you're born with. They're things you learn from people who care enough to teach you." Victoria caught Daniel's eye and felt heat rise in her cheeks. Over the past 3 months, he'd been teaching her constantly. Not just practical skills like how to take orders without mixing them up or remember customer preferences, but deeper lessons about patience and kindness and the art of showing up consistently for people who needed you. As they carried dishes to Betty's dining room table, which had been extended with folding tables and borrowed chairs to accommodate everyone, Victoria thought about the Thanksgivings of her childhood. Formal dinners with business associates, caterers in white gloves conversation that focused on market trends and acquisition strategies. She'd never experienced anything like this. The mismatched dishes and second-hand furniture, the way everyone talked over each other in comfortable chaos, the genuine gratitude that filled the room like warmth from a well-tended fire. Before they ate, Betty asked everyone to share something they were thankful for. Victoria listened as people talked about health and family and small blessings, like good neighbors and steady work and children who were growing up kind. When it was Emma's turn, she stood up in her chair and announced, "I'm thankful for dinosaurs and dogs, and the way Daddy makes bedtime stories sound like movies. And I'm thankful for Victoria because she listens to me like my ideas are important, and she makes Daddy smile more than he used to." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes as the room murmured approval. When it was her turn, she stood on unsteady legs and looked around the table at faces that had become familiar and dear. "6 months ago, I thought success meant being at the top of the corporate ladder," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I thought strength meant being invulnerable, and leadership meant making the hard choices that other people couldn't make." She looked at Daniel, who was watching her with encouraging eyes. "But this community, this family, you've all taught me that real success is measured by the relationships you build and the people you lift up and the love you give without expecting anything in return. I'm thankful for second chances and patient teachers and the discovery that it's never too late to learn what actually matters." She sat down to warm applause and Betty's approving nod. Daniel reached over and squeezed her hand under the table, and Victoria felt a rush of gratitude, so profound it nearly overwhelmed her. After dinner, as the dishes were being cleared and the adults settled into post-meal conversation, Emma climbed into Victoria's lap and announced that she was too full to move ever again. "That's what good Thanksgiving dinner is supposed to do," Victoria said, stroking Emma's hair. "Make you so happy and full that you never want it to end." "Do you think the pilgrims felt like this?" Emma asked sleepily. Like they found exactly where they belonged, Victoria looked around Betty's living room at people who'd welcomed her despite having every reason not to trust her. At Daniel, who'd forgiven her cruel test and given her the chance to prove she could change. At Emma, who'd accepted her presence in their lives with the generous heart of childhood. "Yes, sweetheart," Victoria said softly. "I think they felt exactly like this." Later that evening, after the dishes were done and the leftovers distributed and the guests had drifted home with full stomachs and fuller hearts, Victoria found herself walking through downtown Riverside Falls with Daniel and Emma. The small town looked different at night, peaceful and welcoming, with warm light spilling from house windows and the sense of lives well lived unfolding behind those glowing panes. "This was the best Thanksgiving ever," Emma announced, skipping between Victoria and Daniel and swinging their hands. "Next year we should invite even more people, maybe the whole town." "That might be a little ambitious, sweetheart." Daniel laughed. "Though I like your enthusiasm for hospitality." "Victoria taught me that word," Emma said proudly. "It means making people feel welcome and taking care of them when they need it. Victoria's really good at hospitality now that she's learned how." "She certainly is." Daniel agreed, catching Victoria's eye with a smile that made her heart skip. As they reached Daniel's front porch, Emma ran ahead to unlock the door, while the adults lingered on the steps, reluctant to end the perfect day. "Thank you," Victoria said quietly, "for including me today, for letting me be part of your traditions, for giving me the chance to understand what I've been missing my whole life." "Thank you for staying," Daniel replied, "for doing the work to become someone worth including, for showing Emma and me what it looks like when someone genuinely wants to change." Victoria turned to face him fully, her heart pounding with the words she'd been holding back for weeks. "Daniel, I love you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I love the father you are, and the man you've become, and the way you see goodness in people even when they don't deserve it. I love Emma like she was my own daughter, and I love this life we're building together." Daniel's eyes searched her face, and Victoria held her breath. "I love you too," he said, finally, his voice rough with emotion. "I love your courage, and your willingness to admit when you're wrong, and your determination to be better. I love watching you discover what it means to be part of a family." He cupped her face gently in his hands. "But mostly, I love who you are when you're not trying to be anyone else, when you're just Victoria mashing potatoes and reading bedtime stories and letting Emma teach you about dinosaurs. That's the woman I fell in love with." They kissed, then, soft and sweet and full of promise, while Emma's voice drifted from inside the house as she chatted with the cat about the day's adventures. When they broke apart, Victoria rested her forehead against Daniel's and smiled. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now," Daniel said, wrapping his arms around her, "we take it one day at a time. We keep showing up for each other. We keep learning how to be a family. And we see where this beautiful, messy, imperfect love takes us." Victoria thought about the test she'd conducted in her corporate office all those months ago. She'd wanted to see Daniel's character under pressure, never realizing that love itself was the ultimate test. Not the cruel kind that sought to break people down, but the generous kind that invited them to grow up. Standing on Daniel's front porch with his arms around her, and Emma's laughter echoing from inside their home, Victoria finally understood what she'd been searching for her entire life. She'd found it in the last place she'd expected to look, in a small-town diner, in a 7-year-old's bedtime stories, in a man who'd taught her that real strength meant loving fearlessly even after you'd been broken. The test was over. The real life was just beginning. Friends, if this story touched your heart the way it touched ours, please don't let it end here. Hit that subscribe button and join our Soul Lift Stories family, because we believe in the power of love to transform even the coldest hearts and the most impossible situations. This story reminds us that sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who need love the most, and that it's never too late to choose kindness over cruelty, connection over control, and family over fortune. If you believe in second chances and the possibility that broken people can learn to love fearlessly, please share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop a heart in the comments if this reminded you that true strength comes from protecting others, not testing them. And remember, the greatest test any of us will ever face isn't how we handle success or power, but how we choose to love the people who trust us with their hearts. Until next time, keep lifting each other up. The world needs more stories like Daniel and Emma and Victoria's, and it starts with each of us choosing love over fear, one ordinary, extraordinary day at a time.